Congratulations on starting your first job as a software engineer. Getting to this point is a great achievement, but you're probably wondering what's going to happen now that you got hired. What's next? Well, this is the right video for you because I'm going to break down what is onboarding for software engineers, what is expected of you during this time, and how you can already start contributing and making an impact this early in your job. So keep watching and subscribe for more videos for junior engineers. Hi, I'm Yulia Eskin, a Silicon Valley tech lead and a career coach for software engineers. This is the right channel for you if you're a software engineer who wants to get promoted, become a tech lead, or just be a better engineer. So let's dive in. When I started working as a software engineer, I didn't really know what to expect, and to be honest, I was terrified because it was all so new to me. I mean, working in tech is not the same as studying computer science, am I right? The good news is that most companies get that, and so whether you're a new graduate or a senior engineer, most companies will do onboarding for new hires regardless of their level of experience, because they want to train you, teach you, and most importantly, set you up for success. So let's talk about onboarding. Depending on the size of the company and how organized they are, onboarding can be pretty minimal or pretty comprehensive, and it really depends on the company. Usually when a company reaches about 100 employees, they're going to start streamlining onboarding so that it's easier for new hires to learn what they need to do and become productive. The goal of onboarding is to teach you enough about what you need just to get started. Don't expect that it's going to cover everything the company is doing, all the technical work that's being done, but it's just to give you enough ideas so that you can get started, and it is expected that during that time you will still be doing a lot of your own individual learning. So typically you can expect onboarding to last about a week, where the first few days are spent really on company level topics, and the last few days you're going to be onboarding on your particular team. In this video, I actually talk about personal onboarding experiences I had that were polar opposites, so I definitely recommend you to watch it after this video. In terms of the format, onboarding is usually done in person or right now in a virtual setting where someone is presenting information to you and all the new hires in a kind of classroom fashion. However, it's also expected that some of the content of the onboarding will just be provided to you in documents that you would need to read or videos that you would need to watch. And this is especially true for technical documentation. So let's talk about which topics get covered in the first few days of the company level onboarding. You'll be given presentations on the company product and mission. You'll be learning what different teams are doing and probably meeting those team leads. You'll be learning domain-specific information. So imagine if your company was in healthcare. So you'll be learning about the specific relevant information in healthcare that your company needs for the product development. Or if you're working for Uber, for example, then you'll be learning about the auto industry and any specific knowledge you need to have to do your job. Often you'll also be given security training and intellectual property training. This is true especially for very regulated fields like in finance or healthcare. During those first few days, you'll also be meeting your manager, your team, and start to have some introductions with the people that you'll be working with closely. After a few days have passed, you'll most likely start onboarding on your own team. Now, this probably is going to be a little bit less streamlined than the company level onboarding, and it really depends on your team to create a certain onboarding. A lot of the times it can just be written documentation that you will be asked to read, but expect to learn about the following few things. You're probably going to get a product overview of what your team is working on, as well as a technical overview, which tends to be the architecture or any design docs that are relevant to learn about the backend, the front end, maybe database architecture that your team works in. You're going to be asked to download a lot of the code repositories that your team owns. You'll also most likely will be downloading the languages you'll be working in, any database technology, any container technology like Docker, and probably some tools you'll be using very regularly like an IDE. And lastly, in that first week, the goal is really for you to be able to set up your machine so that you can compile and run the code, and so that you're essentially ready to start coding, ready to start working. So if you're just starting out and you want to do the best in that first year as a software engineer, check out my website and how I can help you as a career coach with finding your voice, finding confidence, and doing your job well as a software engineer. So let's now talk about what are the expectations from you during this time. So first of all, the most important thing is to redefine what onboarding really means. Yes, there's that week of training you get when you just start. However, when companies companies think about onboarding, they're really thinking about how long does it take an employee to become productive. And so as I'm going to be talking about onboarding now, I'm actually going to be talking about a longer period of time. For a new hire who is a senior engineer and somebody who already has experience, it probably will take about 3 to 6 months to become productive as they start learning about everything the team is doing, the infrastructure, the code, the product that they're working on. However, if you're a new graduate and this is your first job, then really the expectation of your employer from you is that it would take you about a year to become productive. And because it usually takes a year to become productive, employers are really upset if you leave your job in less than a year, because in that first year, they're spending a lot of money, time, and resources to get you to the point where you can be productive. And that's why it's going to be a big loss to them if you decide to leave in less than a year. So to set expectations, during those first few months, you'll be assigned small tasks that will help you learn about the code base, about the processes your team follows, and the product your team owns. These tend to be bug fixes, small enhancements to the code, tech debt items, and eventually small features. The size and the complexity of the work assigned to you will grow over time, so don't expect to be assigned a very large project right away. Remember, your team and your company, they want to set you up for success. So if you're hungry for ownership, that's great, but just understand that usually there's a period of at least 3 to 6 months that you'll be doing smaller work just to get familiar with what your team does. Your company is going to feed you more challenging work bit by bit by seeing how you do on the work you're given, and if it is easy for you, they're going to start assigning you more difficult work. So don't worry, you're going to get to that point where you can make a lot of impact pretty soon. So what does your team expect from you during this time? Because this is a time when you're supposed to be learning about everything your team and company does, your team really expects you to use them to navigate this information and this path as you learn. In that first 6 months to a year, especially if you're a new hire, there's going to be a lot of supervision and guidance from your team so that you can achieve your tasks. So don't shy away from asking for their help, because it's completely expected that they should be there for you during this time. In this time, the best that you can do to meet expectations is to be proactive about your learning. So what does this mean? First, ask a lot of questions about the product you're building, about the code base, about the infrastructure, the architecture, and the processes your team follows. For example, Scrum, testing, releases. Second of all, learn about the process of software development at your company. Especially if this is your first job, the best thing right now is to understand how the software get developed, how the products get built in a professional setting. And especially for the product your team owns, think about understanding who are the stakeholders, who are the users, and who are the decision makers. Next, understand who are the go-tos on your team so that as questions arise, you have many resources to pull from and you're not just going to the same person over and over again with questions. Next, one of the most important things at this period is not to block yourself. And what does that mean? Block is a term that comes from Scrum, and that means that you want to be productive, you want to be efficient, you don't want to be stuck. Block really means to be stuck. And a lot of junior engineers are afraid to ask questions and afraid to ask for help, especially now in this remote setting. And it totally makes sense. And my suggestion is spend a couple of hours on trying to dig for information on what you're working on, reading the code. However, if after a couple of hours you're not making much progress, shoot a question to your tech lead, to your manager, or one of the go-tos for a certain area. The most important thing for your team is that you're productive. And if you cannot be productive without getting an answer to some question you have, then you really should go and ask that question. And the last thing here is give yourself a lot of slack during this time. Your team is not expecting you to achieve productivity until about 6 months to a year on the job. So give yourself a lot of slack. This is a time for learning. I know it's hard for all of us not to feel productive and to have to depend on others, but just give yourself the space to acknowledge that yes, it's a messy time, and eventually you're going to learn everything you need, and you're going to even be training and teaching other people. Unfortunately, you can't skip this time of learning and onboarding, and as they say, the only way out of this is through this. And the last thing I want to talk about here is how can you make an impact and start contributing during this time of onboarding. So here are 3 ways that you can make a contribution. As you begin to navigate all the learning and reading that you're doing while onboarding on your team, you're going to see that some things are not documented, maybe there's some documentation that is outdated, or maybe there are just some gaps. One of the best things that new hires can do is make sure that that documentation gets updated. Because you're the person who learns that, you are really there uncovering all these gaps. One of the things that tech leads and managers often ask new hires is to pay attention where there are these idiosyncrasies and to fix that. That is really a service that you can provide to your team so that the next person reads documentation that is at a higher level. Documentation is always a pain point for most teams. It's hard to keep it up to date, so that would be an amazing contribution on your part. In a similar vein, if you are given a presentation by somebody on your team, knowledge transfer on some topic, backend, front-end infrastructure, and this presentation has never been recorded, one of the best things you can do is actually record that so that the next person who starts can see the recording. This will actually free up a lot of time for your team, and it will be an idea that your tech lead will really appreciate. Of course, these recordings will need to be redone when information becomes stale. However, this kind of thing can actually be really useful for about a year. And the last way that you can really make a great impact is to look for small ways to make improvements in the code while you're doing your work. So for example, when you're assigned a bug fix and you're working in a certain area of the code, trying to figure out what the bug is and making your fix, look around at that area of the code and see, is there anything that you could do to make it a little bit more clear, a little bit more clean? So for example, maybe the code is not very well commented and you can add a little bit more documentation in that area. Maybe there's an assumption or a gap that you realize through working in that part of the code, through solving the bug, and that's something you can document there. Other than that, maybe you can rename or refactor a certain method to be a little bit more cleaner. Just make sure that everything that you do is in the area that you're already working on. Engineers always try to improve the quality of the code while they're doing other things. And it's really how tech debt gets solved over time through these small and iterative improvements. So if you can do that, that will be a really beautiful contribution and a service to your team. However, one word of caution here is not to attempt to do any big refactors or enhancements without first talking to your manager. If you're assigned one ticket and you really end up taking a long time because you're doing something else, that can have a negative consequence, so just make sure to check in with your tech lead first. So I hope that this video shed some light on what to expect in onboarding and also to help you not stress as much during this time. Give yourself more slack and get a lot of rest during this time, because I know that it's hard. And if you would love some support on how to onboard, make a good impression, and do well at your job, check out my website leadersemerging.com and how I can help you as a career coach. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.